Okay, great stuff. So we've got our new theme and we've installed that and activated that in the site. And one thing I just want to show you here is that, and I'll just refresh the page as well, we don't have any settings for our theme yet here on this page. And that's kind of the next thing that the tutorial also goes through. So right now, you can see that we've just done the very basic, this is pretty much the most minimal theme you can make in Moodle. So what we'll do is just add this basic settings page here as well, and it'll just give us the ability to do just a few basic settings. It'll just kind of look exactly like this boost settings page basically. And what I want to do basically, I mean, a big part of theming is being able to write your own CSS. So I want to be able to make a CSS file here and add some styles and have that apply to our site. And that'll all happen by creating our settings here as well. So let's continue with this settings page. And the next thing to do is to, well, they kind of go through and explain it in more detail here. And so that's all very good to do. But this is just kind of looking at Theme Boost and the way it does it. And we're going to make something similar and copy it into our theme as well. So basically, let's have a look. This is what we're going to need right here. So what we're going to need first is a way to tell our theme to look in for a custom CSS file, SCSS. So we don't have the file here yet, but we have a config file that will kind of be, this is what will tell the theme which files to look for something like an SCSS extra file. So what we're going to do actually is scroll down, 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 and there's one setting we need in the config file. Here we go. So I think we'll implement all this stuff, but I think the order makes sense to start with putting this one in first. So put this at the bottom here and change it to our theme name. So this tells the theme that there's some extra SCSS, which is basically CSS but allows you to write it in more handy ways, and it compiles down to CSS. So there's some extra SCSS that is returned by this function. So we need to go and implement this function over in our lib file. Right now our lib file is looking very empty. This is what we're going to need to put in there. So let's copy that and pop that in. And definitely need to change the name there. And in fact change it everywhere it says photo. And you can see what it's doing. So we start with like a empty string, and then we go through our settings and we kind of just add to the string with this concatenation operator here in PHP. Add to the end of this variable all the different CSS we get. Now, one thing you might notice here is that the CSS here is coming from Boost and then coming from some of our settings, but it's not coming from any file here, which is what I want to make. I want to make like a SCSS file here that we can include. And there is a way to do that, which they go through a bit later in this tutorial, which is by adding these two lines as well. Let's copy those in. And you can see there is that before we return, we also want to get CSS from our file directory as well, which is going to be in our theme name. And right now we're not including these, so we're going to need to concatenate them all together, combine them like this. Right, so now you can kind of see we get our SCSS variable, but we also put the pre and the post CSS around it. And that'll kind of mean that the pre CSS gets overridden by the later ones. So we might also want to now just put in this file here into our theme, post.scss file, and that'll be included. So we'll make a new directory, and in there we can make a new file called post. .scss. And of course here we can have like a more complicated structure and put like imports in here. For now I will just leave it, and what I might do is put in just some CSS straight into here. So for example, let's just look at this. Let's say I'm just looking for like some kind of ID that I can do some stuff to, so maybe page content, sure. So let's copy that, and we'll give it like a background color, green, something very obvious, so we know if our post CSS is being included. So that looks good. Now, what's the next step? I think let's just finish adding the settings files here as well. We're going to need to add a settings page and then some lang strings as well. That will display our setting, the names of the settings and things like that. So we need to go into the tut and find here's the lang strings. So let's grab those. So of course we need, if we put new settings, we need to kind of display what those settings are called. So we've already got some settings here, so let's get rid of those out of this one. We don't need that because we've already got that there. We don't need plugin name. We don't need a region there because we've already got that as well. And then let's just make sure we rename it. And have we got any more photos? No. Cool, so I've just renamed everything there. We've got our lang strings. And the next step will be to put the actual settings file as well. So we can copy in the settings.php file. And basically this file is pretty much just copied from the Boost theme. So it's just going to have all the same settings as Boost. And we don't have to go into it too much. And we'll see all these settings once we update our plugin. Each kind of setting you can see here, they'll display in our admin menu. So we've copied that settings. Let's make a new PHP file, settings.php, and put that in there. And now what we will do is make sure that everywhere it says photo, we change to our new theme name to make sure that's updated everywhere, and just maybe check if it says photo anywhere. So that looks pretty good. So with that, we have put a bunch of new files in, and we've added a couple new functions that are going to compile and get our SCSS. So let's just purge the cache here, because all this theme type stuff is usually cached, like CSS and that kind of thing. And with that, we can go back into our Moodle site and reload. And what I'm expecting to see is a new settings page down here. Okay, we can see our settings page and we can see the green. So that's kind of just telling us at least that our SCSS file is working. We changed the background color to green. If we look into our theme, we can see a settings page with similar settings to the Boost theme, and they will work in the same way. Basically here, like for example, the preset is a SCSS file that is loaded in this lib function, which we can see here. We basically, if this setting is enabled, the settings preset, then great, look in the Boost theme and grab that file and add that to our SCSS. And it's a similar story with all these other settings, is that they're kind of loaded in and then eventually returned here. And I guess the key for us is that we did a customization here in the post.scss file and did a customization like that, which is pretty cool. So our post SCSS is useful for defining rules like this because, and it says this on the page as well, if it's loaded in last, then yeah, it's included last, so it overrides the other things. So that's where you want to put rules like specific things like setting the background color, because if we had this identical CSS somewhere else, like for example here in this main default file, we would override it in our post SCSS section. But there's also the pre file as well, which I think we should make. And that's also powerful because here is where you would set variables basically that are used everywhere. So where post is useful for individual rules, pre is good for setting individual variables. Because for example, if we look in the boost, this is the boost default SCSS file, we can see that first thing it does is set all these variables. So for example, like primary, it sets it to blue, which is this color here. But we can override this if we wanted to. And so what we could do is, for example, go in and set primary to maybe green as well, because that's kind of a easy color to see. And make sure we purge caches after doing something like that. And now let's refresh our page. And you can see that all the links, the blue color has become green now. So that's how you can use variables in a powerful way in your pre.scss file. So I think that's a good place to leave it. We can customize our CSS and we have access to settings the same as Boost. And with that, I'll just quickly make a commit as well, so you can see the code here if you want as well. Okay, cool. So in the next lectures we can actually override some templates as well.